So the Packers started the regular season with a bang, and this led to team publicist Tom Miller stating that Lombardi could have his pick of either being mayor of Green Bay or governor of Wisconsin. On the subject of success, Lombardi said, "You defeat defeatism with confidence, and confidence comes from the man who leads. You just have it. It's not something you get, you have to have it right in your belly." So here we have him lifting himself up in a way he didn't normally do. In previous quotes, he would emphasize the team as a whole and the precision of the execution. However, here, I don't think he was trying to be really full of himself, but rather he was simply explaining how the process worked. I would, however, disagree with the notion that confidence is something you simply have that can't be developed. For example, you could argue Bart Starr is a good counter to this, but I wouldn't view this as a long-held belief by Lombardi, but rather merely an off-the-cuff comment that he would probably take back if questioned about it later. Now, before we continue, I wanted to give some corrections and clarifications to things I mentioned earlier, as well as tell a few more player stories. For example, in another video on my channel, I talked about Lombardi's connection to Frank Sinatra, as it was stated he and his wife had met him earlier on. Well, their son, Vince Jr., confirms this. Mom had known him from the Hoboken days. She would go with friends to a few bars where he sang early in his career. And, as a side note, if you ever see a photo of Vince Lombardi and you're trying to date the year it took place, don't go by this hat. Even though this logo predates the famous Packer G, Lombardi did continue to sometimes wear it, as seen in this instructional video filmed years later. Also, I wanted to give a correction to Lombardi and his relationship with Giants co-owner Wellington Mara. The two had been classmates, but I wasn't sure just how close they'd been. While it doesn't appear they were necessarily best friends, Wellington did confirm the two sat together in multiple classes, as seen in this interview. This, of course, makes perfect sense due to the alphabetical order of the last names.
Yeah, Vince and I sat in most of the philosophy courses together, ethics and psychology. And I remember that Father Cox, who was the ethics professor, had a huge class. I think there were about 400 of us in the same room. And it was difficult to hold people's attention.
The second question about Wellington was how much time had passed between their days as students and when they saw each other next. As it turns out, Wellington actually came across Lombardi years before he worked for the Giants. This was when Lombardi was a coach of Fordham's freshman team. Vince was searching the sidelines for a player he wanted to put into the game, but he couldn't find him. It turns out this was because the player was already out in the field, which must have been a bit embarrassing. When Lombardi came to the Packers, Paul Hornung's reputation for late-night excursions was well known, with this Golden Boy nickname sometimes being used sarcastically, such as one piece in the Green Bay Press-Gazette, where one anonymous writer said, "Perhaps our Golden Boy should leave for Hollywood in order to enhance his career as a nightclub entertainer, leaving a spot for someone who really wants to play football." And what types of incidents were these? Well, one apparently happened at the Piccadilly, a bar on the east side of town, where Hornung engaged in a public striptease with a girl he was on a date with. He admitted there was some truth to that, but he clarified by saying, "It was around town that I had done a striptease, and that my date had stopped at Panties and Bra." Hornung said he messed around with the drums there and the microphone. We sang and the crowd joined in. It was kind of warm, so I took off my coat and tie and loosened my shirt collar. I like how he mentioned the heat as a reason for this, but he doesn't explain why no one else there except for his date was especially bothered by the temperature. In all seriousness, I saw zero word and anything happening to Hornung for this incident, other than some members of the public calling him out. Coach McLean and upper management, if they did do anything, was evidently of so little note it wasn't even mentioned in the story. So when Lombardi finally arrived, he had his hands full. To further elaborate on the first meetings, here's an account of an exchange the two had early on. Lombardi told him, "I know your reputation here. I've investigated you carefully. You have done some things you shouldn't have done, but I don't think you've done as many things as people say you've done." Hornung responded, "If that's the way they want to think, that's the way they'll think." Lombardi answered, "I trust you. I just don't want you to let me down. If you do, it'll be your ass." And on that subject, Lombardi put the Piccadilly and a few other bars in town off limits for the players. For those places that weren't banned, they had to be sitting down at a table or booth. He said, "One thing I won't stand for is a player standing at any bar. I don't care if he's drinking ginger ale and talking to a friend. It just doesn't look good if a fan sees him in the place." And getting back to Paul Hornung, there is one amusing story of Kay Daly, who was the daughter of sports writer Art Daly. At the age of 5, she wanted to go to Hornung's games because she became convinced he was her boyfriend. So one day she wandered off in search of him without her parents knowing. The staff at the stadium ended up finding her, and they put her in the lost and found section where she was reunited with her mother. They left, but not before Kay was able to see him. And we have a few more players' first impressions of Lombardi, such as Forrest Gregg.
There was a ball player that went to SMU with me that I played with there who was with the Giants for a short time. And I saw him, and he said, "Do you know anything about this Vince Lombardi that's been hired as your head coach?" And I said, "No, I don't." He said, "Well, I'll tell you," he said, "he's a real." I didn't know what to expect. When I came to training camp in '59, I came with my bags packed and didn't intend to take many clothes out until I found out what was going on.
Earlier in this documentary, I had shown excerpts from Bart Starr's book. However, here's a video count where he elaborated further.
I suppose Coach Lombardi, coming in there, that the first thing he wanted to do was to make a very tough impression on us, to show us that he was not going to put up with any sort of foolishness and that things were going to be his way and only his way. And he did. He showed us the first day. It was just a vicious training camp. None of us had ever been through anything like that before, knew nothing of what to expect, and he darn near killed half of us.
And in terms of how early players were supposed to arrive for meetings, in the David Maraniss book, When Pride Still Mattered, the claim was 10 minutes early. However, in Michael O'Brien's book, Vince, a personal biography of Vince Lombardi, he claims it was 15 minutes early. Both Maraniss and O'Brien wrote their books based on interviews with people who knew Lombardi, so perhaps this was a case of certain players remembering things differently rather than either O'Brien or Maraniss making a mistake, but it's not clear. And there is one final word on the proper pronunciation of this player's name. I've heard multiple ways to say it, and some pronunciations had the K silent, while others did say the K. In this particular interview, the name was said so fast, it was hard to make it out. What complicates names like these is that sometimes two different people will have the same last name, but they'll say it in different ways. Take, for example, this surname. Is it Weiss or Weiss? It depends on who you're talking to, and with Gary, it ultimately depends on how his family said it. And from the official Green Bay Packers YouTube channel, it appears to be pronounced as Knaffel. But I like to be thorough in my research, so I emailed the office of the Green Bay Packers official historian, and they actually got back to me and confirmed this. So the C at the end is silent, but the K isn't. While I can make mistakes, let it never be said that I am not anal retentive about fact-checking. Also, minus any bonuses, Lombardi's starting annual salary was $36,000, not $35,000, as I said earlier. And speaking of Gary Knaffel, here are his thoughts on some of the early happenings of 1959. First, he confirmed the story about Lombardi telling Packers president Dominik Olejniczak to leave that first meeting at St. Norbert. He first walked in and he threw him out. He said, "You don't ever come into any meetings I'm having with my players." After our first meeting with Coach Lombardi, we knew exactly where we stood. When asked about how the team felt prior to the very first regular season game against the Bears, he said, "He had us ready to play that game on Wednesday. I still maintain that we were in the best shape of any team in the National Football League, all due to him. We all felt that if the game was even in the fourth quarter, we were going to win it." You look back, I'm not sure of this. I think we won an awful lot of games in the fourth quarter. When asked about why Lombardi chose McCann for quarterback over Bart Starr, Knaffel reflected, "Once again, Bart was in a situation where the head coach didn't think he was the guy. See, Lamar and I were with the Cardinals together. Mac physically was a fantastic quarterback. Big, strong, but he was emotionally unstable. He was psycho. He'd get mad and do bad things. You never knew what he was going to do. If you dropped the ball, it was a personal thing. You did it because you didn't like him, which is unbelievable." This is the first I've heard about McCann having a temper, although Knaffel didn't deal well with people who had stern personalities, so maybe he was exaggerating a bit. And when we're on the subject of quarterbacks, Lombardi revealed his first impressions of Bart Starr. "When I first met him, I found that he also had a fine analytic mind and a retentive memory, but at the same time, I found him so polite and so self-effacing that I wondered if he wasn't too nice a young man to be the authoritarian leader your quarterback must be." On this point, Starr said, "I wasn't a good leader. I had no faith in my ability to get the job done, and consequently, I didn't get it done." On the team's quarterback situation, Lombardi confided, "The trouble is, no one is head and shoulders above the rest. It's a poor situation." Moving on, author O'Brien gives a little more information on the specific drills Lombardi made the team do. Some of the hardest ones were the grass and nutcracker drills. The first drill involved players running in place, lifting their knees high up for as long as 30 seconds. When Lombardi yelled down, the players had to hit the ground as fast as they could. Then, when he shouted up, they would get back on their feet and repeat the process. This drill lasted between 3 to 5 minutes. The nutcracker drill was where a defensive player would position himself between two bags, and an offensive player would then charge at them, trying to push the defender aside so a trailing ball carrier could get through. The resulting workouts led to the following weight losses. Tom Bettis, 240 pounds to 220 pounds. Bill Forrester, 240 to 230, and Dave Hanner, 270 to 250. When Gary Knaffel brought up Lombardi's stern demeanor to Marie, she countered his claim on how tough it was to be around him in camp by stating, "How would you like to live with him?" One interesting note during this time period was that Lombardi could not be seen in the team photos. Cliff Crystal, the official Packers historian, addressed why. "Like minds. Very interesting, not to mention it's an intriguing question. I had no idea, so I asked Chuck Lane, whom Lombardi hired as a publicity director in 1966. Chuck said he never discussed the matter with Lombardi and certainly wasn't about to make an issue of it. But Chuck speculated that it probably had something to do with how Army and/or the New York Giants had done things when Lombardi was an assistant coach. Sure enough, Ryan Yonoshad, a member of the athletic staff at West Point, tells me neither head coach Red Blake nor his assistants appeared in Army's team photos from 1949 to 53 when Lombardi was an assistant there. Lombardi probably revered Blake more than any other football coach. I think Lombardi embraced the philosophy for the rest of his coaching life that if it was good enough for Red Blake, it was good enough for him. That said, Lombardi appeared in team photos with the Giants from 1954 to 58. When it came to Lombardi's attitude and coaching in general, he said there were approximately 150 plays in a game, and maybe only 3 or 4 would be the difference that would decide the winner. This meant a player had to be going 100% in every single play. To sum up Lombardi's philosophy in one word, it would be persistence. Never let your guard down and give 100% every time. And this is why he went so hard on the players in practice. One of the main complaints that football fans have are teams that run the prevent defense once they get a good lead late in the game. Well, Lombardi disliked this too. He even wrote that he wasn't a big fan of the nickel defense because of the spacing it leaves open over the middle with short to mid-range passes. At the NFL level, quarterbacks are too good, and it doesn't matter how many defensive backs you drop deep. A competent quarterback is going to pick your defense apart. On the soon-to-be famous Packers sweep, Lombardi wrote, "My number one play has been the power sweep, sometimes called the Lombardi sweep. It began to be a part of me during my days at Fordham. I was impressed playing against the single wing sweep, the way those Pittsburgh teams of Jock Sutherland ran it, and I was impressed afterward when I attended coaching clinics and the single wing was discussed. Today, our sweep has a lot of those Sutherland qualities, the same guard pulling technique, the same ball carrier's cutback feature, and there's nothing spectacular about it. It's just a yard gainer. But on that sideline, when the sweep starts to develop, you can hear those linebackers and defensive backs yelling, "Sweep, sweep," and almost see their eyes pop as those guards turn upfield after them. But maybe it's my number one play because it requires all 11 men to play as one to make it succeed, and that's what team means. However, contrary to later recountings, the team didn't run the play perhaps as quite as much as some would believe. Cliff Crystal addressed this. The power sweep, with a halfback carrying to the strong or right side of the formation, was clearly Vince Lombardi's signature play, especially when Paul Hornung was in his prime from 1959 to 62. Lombardi also had a weak side sweep with a fullback carried to the left. In 1961-62, and then down the stretch again in 1965, the Packers won NFL championships by running the ball and mixing that with outstanding defense. I don't know what kind of internal stats they kept at the time, but I don't think they ran the sweep to excess. I recently watched a replay of the 1961 championship game, and as I recall, the Packers didn't run the power sweep for the first time until only 6 minutes remained in the first half. In fact, I can't remember the Packers scoring in a sweep in a championship game. Hornung ran 13 yards around left end for a TD in the 1965 title game against Cleveland following Jerry Kramer, but that wasn't a sweep. I was told by Zeke Bratzkowski, the backup quarterback, it was a play put in for that game, and he didn't think the play even had a name. Now that these corrections and clarifications are out of the way, let's move on to their Week 3 match against the undefeated San Francisco 49ers. October 12th. In windy 37-degree weather at home, the Packers slipped by San Francisco 21-20 in the game with two 80-yard touchdown drives. The first would end with Max McGee hauling in a 30-yard pass for McCann. Then the 49ers would march right back and nail a 28-yarder by Tommy Davis to shave the early lead down to 4. In the second period, Hornung rushed in from 8 yards out to put them on top 14-3. Then San Francisco recovered a fumble and a punt, which led to a second Davis field goal. This score would be carried into the second half. Then McCann threw an interception to Dave Baker. 49ers quarterback Y.E. Tittle hit Billy Wilson for 14 yards out to cut the lead to 1. This was followed by a huge 75-yard lob from Tittle to R.C. Owens, and San Francisco had their first lead of the game. Late in the third quarter, the Niners had the ball, the lead, and the momentum. This is where the Packers' D showed up and two back-to-back plays. On the last play of the third, Tittle was sacked by Bill Forrester for a 12-yard loss. Then, on the first play of the fourth, San Francisco running back Joe Perry fumbled and Dave Hanna recovered on the Packer 40. This started a 10-play drive of about 75 yards due to a holding penalty, where at the 49ers 39, McCann threw a 15-yarder to Knaffel that took it to the 24. One more Knaffel connection brought it to the 12. Then, a few plays later, on a 3rd and 12, presumably after a penalty, McCann and Knaffel again came out on top with a 21-yard score. With the game tied, all they needed was the extra point to get ahead. However, nothing was 100% guaranteed, as Bart Starr had fumbled the ball in an attempt just 2 weeks earlier against the Bears. However, the hold was good, and Hornung put it through, and his team was now ahead 3 minutes and 15 seconds into the fourth. Leading by 1 point and with the ball, disaster almost struck when Luke Carpenter fumbled and the 49ers recovered at midfield. With 1 minute and 6 seconds left, San Francisco attempted a game-winning field goal from 37. However, Tommy Davis's try was short and wide. Green Bay ran out the clock, and they were now on top of the NFL, going from the worst team in the league to the best, at least on paper. To put it in perspective, they had already won 3 times as many games as last year, and this 3-0 start was last accomplished in 1944, which, perhaps not coincidentally, was their last championship. The The Packers, as a team, would finish with 284 yards rushing, and with Hornung being the most dominant with these stats on the ground. 28 carries for 138 yards and a touchdown. McCann would show more inconsistency. He threw 2 touchdown passes, but had only 94 yards passing. However, when he did connect, it was for over 15 yards per completion. And Gary Knaffel was the receiving star of the game. Lombardi praised the come-from-behind drive. The big thing, though, is that we came from behind to win. After Dave Hanner recovered that fumble for us, we drove right down and scored. They're a battling ball club, I'll tell you. Hornung ended up getting hurt twice in that game, and on this point, Lombardi remarked, "He's hurt pretty bad. It's not that serious, but it looks like a real bad neck and shoulder. He got it from the first time he was hurt, and got it in the same spot again late in the game." When asked what they would do if Hornung couldn't play the next game, Lombardi shot back, "Let's not ask that question. If Hornung can't play, we'll have to find somebody else in the squad." Later, Paul Hornung said he didn't really appreciate just how tough Taylor was until he had to take on some of his workload in that Niners game. "I carried the ball around 28 times for more than 140 yards, but my body really wasn't strong enough to take that much abuse." Leo Nomelini, the 49ers' 295-pound all-pro defensive tackle, pounded me play after play. "We won 21-20, but after the game, I was so beat that I checked myself into St. Joseph's Hospital and spent the night there." In the locker room, Knaffel was modest about his performance and focused more on the team. "These guys don't quit. I've never seen a team where every guy tries to help the other like these guys do. They really stick together." McCann reflected on Knaffel. "Knaffel did a good job of getting free on that drive. He made a tremendous catch for that touchdown. Catches like that are what makes the passer." On the one interception McCann did throw, he was asked if the wind played a factor. The wind was a tremendous effect on the passing in general, but on that, I just overthrew Knaffel a little. As an aside, the paper mentioned the death of NFL Commissioner Burt Bell. While he's now largely a forgotten figure, he played an instrumental role in the league's history, as under his leadership, television contracts were negotiated that allowed professional football to be seen by fans from all over the country. On this, Lombardi said, "That's a great loss. I don't know how the National Football League is going to replace him. He's been the backbone of the league since he became commissioner. I also lost a real personal friend." After those first 3 regular season wins, Jerry Kramer wrote this changed his interaction with fans. For example, after losing his shaving kit, he went to Holzer's drugstore to buy a replacement. John, the store owner, gave him a new kit for free. He then noticed Kramer looking at a pie, and he gave him that too. Kramer wrote, "It got embarrassing. There were some other things I needed, but I couldn't ask for them, because John wouldn't let me pay for them." The people were just like that all over Green Bay. Fantastic. It should be noted this dynamic of fans giving free stuff to players was much different back then, as players' salaries were so low they had to have jobs during the off-season. Kramer was still blue-collar. In fact, the store owner would have been much richer than him. This stands in contrast to modern times where a professional athlete could have easily bought that same store. Moving on. October 13th. The paper talked about the injuries to the Packers running backs. In addition to Taylor still nursing second-degree burns and Hornung being hurt, Don McElhenney got a shoulder injury, and Nate Borden had a sore knee, so the backfield was full of problems. The article also discussed the upcoming game against the Los Angeles Rams, who were coming into the match with a record of 1-2. Once again, this would be a home game for Green Bay, the last of their 4 home game streak in Wisconsin, before they were to embark on the 3-week road trip. Sports writer Art Daly, to his credit, wasn't brushing off the Rams despite their record, citing their recent victory over the Bears. October 14th. The Rams were picked as 3-point favorites over the Packers. That's right. A team which started the season at 0-2 was picked to beat Green Bay, the only undefeated club in the NFL. So why was that? Well, it doesn't say. However, in 1958, the Rams had finished with an 8-4 record, and they swept the Packers that year. Also, they beat the Bears a team that the Packers almost lost to in their home opener, and the game against the 49ers was also close, as all that stood between Green Bay and a loss was San Francisco missing a kick. The Packers could have easily been 1-2 coming into this game. On top of this, you had the aforementioned series of injuries to the Packers running backs. So picking the 1-2 Rams to beat the 3-0 Packers wasn't as crazy as it would first appear. October 15th. The backfield injuries were forcing Lombardi to alter his offensive strategy. He said, "We're almost out of backs. We only got 3, and 2 of those have been injured. We'll have to use one of those ends as a flanker more often." And there you have another reason why the Rams might not be as easy as it would first appear. This article doesn't elaborate on this point. However, previously in 1958, the Packers didn't have a permanent tight end for their offensive scheme. Instead, when they were going to run, they would move the right end closer to the line in order to block. The big disadvantage to this was it would tell the defense if it was a pass before the ball was even snapped. The Packers often had 3 running backs in their 1959 offense. 3. So moving one of the ends to a flanker position was introducing a new potential problem for Green Bay, as obviously you can only have 11 players in the field at a time, so they couldn't be 2 receivers and a tight end. It had to be one or the other if you wanted to keep 3 running backs. However, in the 49ers game, the paper implied that they occasionally abandoned the 3 running back set, which would help solve this problem. For example, in the last game, they occasionally had Boyd Dowler come in, while Knaffel and McGee stayed in their positions, so evidently this wasn't as big of a problem as it might first appear. Still though, doing it that way, they were in danger of telegraphing what type of plays they were going to run. October 16th. The Packers defense was highlighted as they were at that point the best in the NFL, but the Rams could provide a challenge via the play of Ollie Matson and Del Schaffner. And here in the pick, to the far bottom left, you see Ray Nitschke still in his role as a backup to Tom Bettis. So the Green Bay Packers stood atop the professional football world as the last undefeated team at 3-0. However, they would soon come crashing down to earth in a mid-season slump that almost completely derailed everything. That's all for now. When we continue, we'll cover the longest losing streak in Vince Lombardi's entire history of coaching. See you next time.